Hey guys, I'm Sid,
My name is Parker.
I'm Mike.
and this is the Try Hard Podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Try Hard Podcast, where today we will be talking about some training recaps for Seid and Parker, and some lack of training for me over the past week as I was vacationing in Europe. And then we'll get into some differences between SRAM and Shimano group sets. And then I have a surprise challenge that I'm going to tell Parker about at the end of this episode that will kick off during our off season.
Oh,
Oh, I didn't even realize that was gonna happen. Okay.
Yeah.
Very excited. I heard some I know State.
We'll
Yeah.
do a case study between Seid and I.
Oh, I'm very excited to hear about that.
Yep.
Yeah, I know Mike and State are currently training for Ironman Maryland. At least Mike was training, then he, as you guys heard, took a little hiatus to go do some much needed traveling. But State, how's your training been this past week? I know this week's gonna be pretty big. You're gonna be doing quite a bit bike volume, but how are you feeling right now? What are we, 3 weeks out from the race? Just over 3 weeks out?
yeah, so it's what, one, two, yeah, just 4 weeks out completely. So 2 more weeks of real, I guess, 2 more weeks of real training, and then we start our taper slowly. But yeah, so last week was a pretty big week. 9 hours on the bike, 44 miles ran, and then just my standard. I usually swim 10 to 12K week, so I just hit 10K in the pool. And then this week is probably I would say probably the most volume I'm gonna hit of this build. I'm gonna aim for and try to hit 46 miles on the run, try to bike 12 to 14 hours, and then I have 2 long swims. So I'm currently doing like a mini training camp out in the country. So I'm in the Plains, Virginia. So all my riding will be outside. So no Zwift for me, so that's pretty great. But yeah, overall training's been really good. Just I'd say just this whole build's been pretty consistent. So over the past, I guess, 13 weeks of average like 10 and a half hours on the bike each week, running around 30 miles a week, and then 10K in the poolish. So this upcoming week is just nailing the rest of the volume for the build, and then start slowly to taper. Just crazy how it's already there pretty much. I feel like just a couple days ago, just me on the podcast crying about how bad Texas went, but now Maryland's already approaching. So yeah, overall pretty good with the training.
Any favorite workouts from the past? I know Sade and I kind of experimented with Sade and put him in a mini. It wasn't really a mini, but a bike block that was like 8 weeks long. Any favorite workouts from that or recently or anything you got coming up that you're really looking forward to, whether that be swim, bike, run related?
So yeah, the bike block, all of the workouts were like really fun. So it was 8 weeks of Tuesday, Thursday, really hard session like intervals on the trainer indoor. So that'd usually be 2 VO2 sessions, and then I'd just on that Saturday I'd go like 4 to 5 hours outside, just get time in the saddle. But recently, specific workouts, I guess we've been doing one that I really enjoyed. It was like the Sam Long workout on the track. So that's 1Ks into 300s. So I've done this. I think this is my third time doing this workout. I did this last Wednesday, and it was real. I think it was my first like really strong track set where I felt like really controlled and felt really good. So I started that workout with so I did 5 1Ks into 5 300. So the 1Ks are basically what 10K pace or 5K pace into 300, just like as fast as you can for like turn, not as fast as you can, but like really just pick up the turnover on the legs. So I started that workout, started my first K at 354, and then my last K at 322. So that was really fun. And then another recent breakthrough for me in training was I did a 10 by 400 in the pool last Friday, and I held a 135 per 100-yard average, which is really good for me. So I'm a really bad and slow swimmer, but this felt like super smooth and really just low effort. So that's what was really good about that swim. And recently I've been swimming only long course meters, but unfortunately my pool switched back to short course yards. So I think the struggle in the long course meters has really helped me in the pool recently. And that recent 10 by 400 was really good for the confidence going into Maryland. But anything, so I guess what else do I have that's fun coming up in the build? I guess Sunday I have a 22-mile long run, which is the last long run of the build. So it's 7 miles at goal pace into 6 miles at goal pace. So that should be fun. But yeah, that's pretty much it for recent sets I've enjoyed. What about you, Parker? I know you've had some crazy monster weeks. This past week was crazy.
Yeah, this past week was one of my biggest weeks I've logged in a long time. But really quickly, I know we joke around all the time that Seid can't really swim or is learning how to swim, but I do want to bring this up as he mentioned he did, what was it, 10 by 400 or 8 by 400?
I did 10 by 400. It was
that-
it was a prescribed 8 by 400, but I did the 10. I didn't want to do the warm up. I was excited 2 extra 400s.
And you held a 135 pace?
Yep.
Yeah, so and I took a look back at Said's training peaks, and back when we first started back in July. Now, granted, he does have newbie gains, and he really wasn't a swimmer before. But we did a time trial, and his all-out 200 pace was a 140. So that was like an all-out 200, and he just did 10 by 400s, holding 135 pace, which is, I mean, that's pretty impressive. I don't know about you, Mike, but if I see like, 1 or 2 seconds of improvement over 100, over a year, I'm stoked for the same distance. Mike is chowing down on dinner. You're muted.
Classic Mike, technical difficulties.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not even eating dinner. I'm just eating some banana bread right now. I will be eating dinner after this.
Homemade?
Homemade from Whole Food staff.
There you go.
Not by me. Yeah, no, that's huge to see a couple. I mean, how many seconds was it? 5 seconds?
5. So he held 140 pace for a 200 all out, and then he held 135 for 10 by 400.
Yeah, and what was the time frame again? That was
about just over a year from July of 2023.
Yeah, that's pretty huge. Yeah, I mean, anytime I'm picking up even a second in the pool on say hundreds or 200s, like that's a really good sign. So that is huge. And I was just telling Seid yesterday, I think, like your speed will come a lot faster than you realize. Like, yes, it may take a year, but I think in that time span, it feels like the time goes by faster than it does. And then when you kind of zoom out, it's like, oh wow, I was swimming 135s per 100s, and then like 6 months from now, say you're going to be doing like 125s. It's like, it's almost, I guess it's kind of like a logarithmic scale. Like you're gonna start improving really fast, and then it'll be the marginal gains after that. But I think the time it took you to go from 140 per 100 to 135, you'll probably jump to 125 in a similar time period.
Yeah, hopefully by next summer
I believe in you.
Hopefully I can hold 125s on next summer. We'll see.
Yeah. Speaking of swim sets, I got a 7 by 300 tomorrow at threshold. I'm gonna try to. That's something I've tried to change in my swim training in the past. And I don't know why I always do this, because in the bike or run, whenever I do a workout, I always start the slowest interval or whatever I make sure is the easiest or the slowest. But in the swim, if Natasha gave me 8 by 200 or 20 by 100, I'd always just try to go out and like hold what I pretty much be like my fastest pace I could possibly hold. And so what I've been trying to do is build into it more like I do in the bike and the run workouts, and I found that to be very beneficial. And so for the 7 by 300 threshold, I could probably, I think I could, muscle my way through and maybe hold 117 to 116 pace for all of them. We get a minute rest, so it's quite a bit rest. But tomorrow I'm going to try to go out with like a 4 minute as my first interval. So like 120 pace for the first 300. And honestly, if I could just hold that and feel strong for all 7 300s, I'm going to be more than happy with that. And if I do feel strong with like 2 to go, maybe bump it up a bit. But I'm trying to focus more on swimming relatively fast with good technique instead of trying to swim as fast as possible and letting my technique go out the door. So that's the change I've been making in my swim training. But last week was, yeah, it was definitely my biggest bike week ever. Probably up there with my biggest weeks ever. The reason why I was doing so much biking is because I recently started biking a bit more outside. I realized that there's a great place to bike outside, about a 30-minute drive for me. So I've been driving out there about 2 to 3 times a week and just logging some great miles, relatively flat roads, not a lot of intersections, not too bad of traffic either. The only one downside is that there's not too many gas stations out there either. So you kind of got to bring all your hydration, which for me isn't too big of an issue because I can hold almost 6 bottles if I put 2 in my jersey. So I can put 4 on my bike and 1 or 2 in my jersey. So I haven't had too much issues. But yeah, last week I logged just over 25 hours on the bike and then 50 miles of running and 22,500 yards swimming. I was very tempted to go and do a 2,500 on Sunday to make it 25,000, but I really didn't want to, so I didn't. But yeah, pretty good. It'll be interesting to see how all this volume on the bike pays off. I definitely, the power is feeling a little bit easier at the different, at right around race power. But like as of now, like for context, I held 245 watts at Ironman Texas last year. And based on how the intervals and the workouts have been feeling right now, I think if I can hold 250 to 255 at Kona in the heat, I'll be very happy with that. Maybe like 265 normalized, but it's going to be very hot. And yeah, I'm excited to see it. I'm doing a lot less threshold work, I want to say. Not as much VO2 work. All right, no, not less threshold work, but less VO2 work and more like race specific work. So I'm doing longer intervals right below, right at, and right above race power. Whereas before in the past, I used to do more your typical, 5x5 VO2 sets in the lead up to an Ironman before really extending the intervals within the last like 3 to 4 weeks before it. So yeah, excited to see how this slight change in programming goes.
And what did you hold at Florida? You said 255 at or 245 at Texas.
I think Florida was like 248 or two. It was like within like 2 or 3 watts.
Okay.
It was very similar. Yeah. I think my regular power was actually like 1 or 2 watts higher, but my normalized power was a few watts lower at Florida than it was at Texas. So, yeah, relatively same. The biggest thing though is I just want to set myself up for a good run, especially in that heat. I think it's going to be very easy to overcook yourself, literally, on the bike. And so really going to try to focus on not pushing too hard on the bike. And hopefully all this bike fitness translates into having a strong run as well. So yeah, and the run's been feeling great. I did, 19-mile average heart rate 144, so relatively aerobic run on Sunday. RPE really never got above 6, and I averaged, 640, 645 pace, and I felt like I was cruising. Could have kept going for much longer. So fueled well too. That was one of the first long runs I've done in I'm close to a month or so that I really focused on fueling because I really wanted to nail it. And so I tell you, fueling is like legal doping. It's
Yeah, I was just saying like that run was very impressive to be doing 6:45 minute miles for 19 miles at average heart rate of 144 is just nuts. So
got a little hot at the end, that's for sure. But it helped. Yeah, had a lot of fluids in, so it was a good run though. I was very happy with how that felt. Definitely one of my best long runs to date. And I think that also goes to show my fueling was really good the day before. Because the day before I had a relatively tough for a 100-mile ride, 4-hour ride, and a race pace runoff, 3 by 1 mile. And I woke up Sunday and I actually felt really good. And I usually can tell how a run is going to go within the first 1 or 2 miles. Like even when I'm doing a track workout, if I'm warming up to the track and I look down at my watch and I see 8:15, I'm like, okay, it's gonna be a tough day today. But within the first mile of that run, I clocked like a 7:20. I was like, okay, this could go relatively well. And I was planning on trying to hold like 7:10 pace, but it just came effortlessly. It was just one of those days where I just started clicking off 650s and 640s, and by the end I was running 630s and feeling good. So hopefully we can do it. I was talking to my mom after, like, yeah, and I just need to do that for another 7 miles after biking 112 miles in 90-degree heat, but we'll see. It's all part of the process.
You could do it, even if it's a little bit slower. I think that's in the range of outcomes.
Yeah.
So you have how many weeks until Kona? Is it 10 weeks or 9 weeks now?
I think 8 weeks or
8 weeks.
nine weeks. Yeah.
Okay.
So kind of 9 training weeks, and then yeah, we get out there in 7 weeks.
Yep.
So should be a fun time. I'm excited for that. Too bad Safe can't come.
Yeah, unfortunately, stuck in corporate jail.
It is.
It's gonna be
But
fun. Got some new camera equipment, Parker, from you, so the content will be leveled up.
yeah, I'm very excited for that. The quality of that camera is pretty incredible in the lens, so I'm very excited to see how that captures Kona and the island itself. Though I didn't realize that bike course. I thought we're biking on the island. I thought it was gonna be a relatively flat bike course. That's not a flat bike course at all.
No,
Yeah,
no,
I was looking at the course profile yesterday, and I was like, oh, 5,500 feet of elevation gain. That's gonna be interesting.
yeah, it's no joke.
Yeah,
It's rollers though, right?
that's what they say.
Yeah, so it's gonna be fast. That's awesome. That's
Well,
fun. Oh.
it's rollers, and I think there's one like you could call it semi climb.
It's not like the turnaround. It's when you bike up to how Javi. Is that how you say it? Javi?
Yeah, happy driver. Is that what they call it?
Yeah.
I
So I
guess
think
how,
it's
yeah.
like a volcano or something. You bike up to it, and then I think you turn around and bike back down.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the biggest climb. Yeah.
I remember watching the live stream of Sam Laidlow leading the group on that climb, and he had like just like a bottle of Coke in his like BTA mount on the old trek. That's when he was riding the trek
Yeah. Good old days.
before he
Oh.
joined the dark side.
But speaking of vacation, Mike, you want to talk about or I guess speaking of travel, rather, you want to talk about your travel vacation in Europe?
Yeah.
You were in Paris, or where else did you go?
Yeah, so we actually flew into London, and then we took the train from London to Paris. When we looked at flights, it was a lot cheaper to actually just fly to London, buy a train ticket, and those added together were still like $100 or $200 cheaper than just like flying into Paris direct. So yeah, we spent 3 days in Paris and approximately 3 days in London. And I think of the two places, I ended up liking Paris more. I was kind of surprised. I thought I would have liked London more. Just I think going into it, I was like, oh, I could speak English in London and like it won't be an issue compared to Paris. Like I was surprised like a fair bit. Like you could just speak English pretty much the whole time and manage your way around. Most people, it seems like they speak English as a second language there. But just the sightseeing, it was amazing. We went to a lot of museums, and then I think my favorite part of the trip was probably visiting the Palace of Versailles. It was way bigger than I expected, and the gardens of Versailles were just so expansive. Like you could
Like a
spend an
maze, isn't it?
it's like a maze. You could spend an entire day there and not cover maybe even half the property. But it was fun. We went out. I rented a rowboat. They have like this huge made pond. So Allison and I were in the rowboat, probably only like 20 minutes, but it was fun. And then we ended up renting e-bikes.
I'm surprised you don't have PTSD from the Great Race.
Yeah, I was like, I literally got on the boat and I was like, oh, this will be so much better than a kayak. And then I started rowing and I was like, this is worse than a kayak. I was like, I don't think I'm meant for paddling. I'd rather be swimming. But then we rented e-bikes, and the funny thing is, Allison like really struggles with biking, or like just staying balanced on a bike. Like she doesn't ever use a bike, and she's always like very afraid to bike. And like she won't even use a city bike in New York City, and that's a big thing. Like it's very easy to get around on a city bike in New York, and she just won't do it. But she got on the e-bike, and she actually enjoyed it and didn't fall or crash or anything. So that was a win. But yeah, it was good. And then I got back Saturday late afternoon, and because I was still on London time, being 5 hours ahead, I went to bed at like 7 o'clock and woke up at 4 a.m. And I was like, "This is perfect. Now I can go out and do my long run before the heat comes out." Uh, and but when I woke up, I felt like my body felt good, like I was ready to work out because I really did nothing over vacation. But my stomach was pretty off, I think, from some of the food on the plane and in the airports and stuff. So I don't think I didn't get out the door until like 5:30. So I just was like up for an hour and a half, just like not feeling great. And then the whole run, my stomach was virtually the same thing. It was just kind of in knots. Had to stop a couple of times to get water and uh, find like a bathroom as well. But yeah, it was actually surprisingly my best long run ever. My heart rate was a little high, but I also think I need to replace the battery in my heart rate strap. The last few workouts I've done on it just doesn't seem right. But ended up averaging 7:57 pace for 18 miles. And I don't think I've ever done like a training run over 13, 14 miles that has been under 8 minute pace. So I was really happy with that. I think part of that had to do with the heat. It wasn't too hot out. It was humid. It was like 80% humidity. Um, and I ended up doing most of it in Central Park. And there's a fair bit of like rolling hills in Central Park. I did
Not
a
flat there.
Yeah, definitely not flat. And I did the whole loop, and there's quite a few hills in like the back half of Central Park that we didn't get to see, Parker, but we'll save that for another day. But yeah, back to training now. Our pool is closed this week, so I don't think I'll be doing as much swimming as I would like to, especially after visiting the Chinatown YMCA this morning. That was an experience. We
You're
got
going back again, or is that a one-time thing?
I'll be going back again. It's like the only place I can go. And I am a member of the YMCA up in Auburn, so I can like use the nationwide membership or whatever to like go to another YMCA a couple times, I think, during the year. But this morning when we walked in, there was no one there to like check in. And
What?
their scanner was just broken, and like there was like 30 or 40 people waiting outside the door. And when they opened the doors, um, the guy who opened them, he was like, I think he was just like a janitor. He left. He was nowhere to be found. And so everyone just walked in, didn't scan. I was like, this is crazy. Like I'm just going to swim for free today, I guess. Like I thought I would have to pay a fee or something. And so I don't know. I guess if you get there right as it opens, you may not have to pay.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was packed. So I don't know how much quality we'll get in. But Ezra plans tomorrow to do 20 by 100 on 130, trying to hold 108. And I said, I'm going to just sit in your draft and do what I can, but I'm not doing 108s tomorrow.
Should be a fun one.
Yeah. But yeah, that's it for me. It was a very good trip. It was very relaxing. Like even though we did a ton of walking, we were averaging around like 20,000 steps per day. Um, I don't think there was any part in the trip where Allison and I felt particularly like stressed. Like usually when I travel for vacation or anything, like I'm stressed about planning and trying to figure out like what we're doing next. But it was just a lot of fun. It was very relaxed. And I think part of that too is in Paris this time of year, the it's pretty standard for most people to take like 5 weeks vacation. So it was like empty. Like I'd go out in the streets at like 9, 10 in the morning and you'd see like maybe a couple people every couple blocks. Whereas like you go outside in New York City and it's just mobs of people.
And now, before we move on to talk about SRAM versus Shimano and all that fun jazz, what are a few of your favorite things that you had to eat overseas? Or you can pick one thing if you want to.
Yeah.
Or
Um,
do your favorite thing and then most like interesting and unique thing if they are different.
oh, let's see. I think my favorite thing, or my favorite place at least, was a restaurant called Magma in Paris. We found out about them. They were on the Michelin Guide. I don't believe they have a Michelin star, but they were recommended on the Michelin Guide. And they do a tasting menu. It was like 8 courses, just incredible. Probably, I actually ranked it as my top restaurant that I've ever been to, and not in terms of like uh service. Like service was not bad. It was good service, but it's like there are restaurants in New York that like overdo the service. Like it's kind of crazy. Um, but in terms of food quality, taste, everything, presentation, like it was top notch. And I think the best thing I tried in the tasting menu, it was like an octopus, but not, how do I describe it?
Calamari.
It wasn't it wasn't like fried calamari. Like it was just like it was cooked, but I don't know. Whatever it was incredible. Both Allison and I were like, yeah, this is the best part of the meal for sure. Um, and then the thing that I liked the most, I mean, that in that specific meal that was the best, but I think we had a lot of duck. Like in Paris, it's pretty that's like a pretty that's like that dish is a staple, like duck and like French fries. Uh, we went to 2 bistros, and I think we each one of us got duck like basically every night we were there. And then in London too, we went to a Chinese restaurant and got duck. And then I think even on we went to a pub in London and they were serving duck as well. So it was interesting. I was kind of surprised at how frequently duck was served at all the restaurants, but it was really good.
Did you have any escargot?
I believe in the tasting menu there was some. I saw it like in the description, but it was in French, and I couldn't read it fully. But I was like, I'll eat whatever it is, and it was like a whole bunch of things, and it was good. But I didn't like have any like snails and like eat it out of that. Like yeah. We
Um,
also, oh, one other cool thing. In London, we went to like afternoon tea, which is kind of a cool experience where they have like little like finger sandwiches and then like some like pastries and whatnot. And then we were drinking tea, and Allison loved that. She really wanted to do that. So I was just along for the ride, and I was like, this is cool.
Oh, well, there we go. And now you guys, I know Mike's kind of the bike expert among the three of us. But say, do you want to talk about? I guess it really wasn't too much of it. Or what happened to you this past weekend?
Oh, yeah. So I'm notorious for not charging my Di2. So I love like a thing I really enjoy doing is going out for my long ride, and then 40 minutes in, just my Di2 dying, and then I just can't shift, and I'm in the little gear, and I just keep spinning out, and it's just a really fun experience. Leads to a lot of road rage. But yeah, so I just need to charge my Di2 more. So I have the old Ultegra Di2 where you have to like take the battery off the bike. So it does tend to have longer battery, but because of that, I just forget to charge it. So I need to make sure to charge it weekly, like Parker and Mike do.
So, Mike, do you want to explain to the listeners what exactly Di2 is and what Shimano is and what SRAM is and what the difference is between the different battery styles?
Yeah. So Shimano and SRAM, for anyone listening that doesn't own a bike or owns a Campagnolo group set, I'm sorry for you. No, I'm just kidding. Campagnolo is pretty nice. But SRAM and Shimano are two rival companies that make group sets and other products for bikes as well, but they're most well known for the group set, which is your front derailleur, rear derailleur, your shifters, all of that. That's all integrated together, and they call all of that a group set. So Shimano and SRAM, they have their top end model or the top end model for SRAM is, I believe it's the red ETAP, and they just actually released their new 2024 red ETAP, which is supposed to be improved. I don't have any personal experience on it, but the older version of the ETAP was pretty good. Like I liked that. I used that on my gray Canyon Speedmax. And then Shimano, their top version is called Dura Ace Di2. Or maybe it's just Dura Ace, but I think it's Dura Ace Di.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then their middle range version is called Ultegra Di2. And then on the SRAM side, I think it's Force Axis ETAP. Pretty sure that's it. I've never used the middle of the road version for them. I have used a Force cassette just because it's like the same as, and this is pretty common for both SRAM and Shimano. If you use like Dura Ace, if you use the top end group sets for both, you can use the middle range cassettes if you want to. So for example, if you use a Wahoo Kicker or a Garmin Tax Neo, there's almost no point in buying like a Dura Ace cassette or a red ETAP cassette, because you're just spending stupid money for weight savings is essentially what you're doing. You might as well just buy the middle tier cassette to put on your trainer, because when you're riding inside, you're not worried about weight, and there really isn't any, at least from my experience, there's no like shifting performance differences. Like they're the same size cogs, it's just made of a little bit heavier material. And maybe it's actually the middle tier version might be more durable. So on an indoor trainer, I use the middle range cassette with my group sets. But in terms of differences, the main difference between the two top end group sets is that the Dura Ace is wired and the SRAM is wireless. Now, that is not that big of a deal, I think, when you actually use them and you test out the differences. But I've found in my experience, the Shimano is faster in terms of shifting. So when you press the button, I mean, it is not instantaneous, but I'm sure it's a couple milliseconds before it actually shifts. Whereas you can almost feel a slight delay in the SRAM, especially if you're using the SRAM wireless blips. It's not that bad, but there were times where when I would use the wireless blips specifically, which to explain what that is, SRAM has these little like circular buttons that you can put on the ends of aero bars, or I had a monopole on my Canyon that was 3D printed, and it had like a cutout where you could place these little wireless blip buttons and use those, and you can pair that to your group set, and you can use that instead of using like a wired connection, where normally with SRAM they have what they call a blip box that's somewhere housed inside of your bike or connected to your stem, and then the wires feed out to the buttons on your aero bars or your on your base bar as well. But you could convert your bike to be 100% wireless, which is cool in theory, but one of the drawbacks I find is, or two drawbacks, is the shifting time is a little slower than that of a Shimano, but not that big of a deal, especially in like a triathlon. If you're doing a flat course, like it shouldn't really matter that much. If you're on a hillier course, then yes, it might bother you a bit. The second downside is that on the SRAM blips, they're not rechargeable and you cannot replace the battery. So when those blips die, they're dead. You can't do anything about it, which makes me worried, because I just feel like, it's just every triathlete's luck that it would die for good, like in the middle of like your biggest race of the season. Like it's just like how it seems to always work out. So
You have to like replace them, or
yeah, you have to buy a replacement for
And
them.
what's the battery life on those? You know?
They say 2 years, which is cool. But then there's kind of a bug with the SRAM ETAP or the SRAM Axis app. Like every time I go into the app, it always says that my blips have less than 10% battery and I need to replace them. But then like once I actually get it connect it and start like shifting it a couple times, like then it'll go back up saying like, oh, it's like 90% battery. It's a weird thing, and I read some forums online, and a lot of people had experienced the same thing where like the first time you connect them, they show low battery, and then once you actually start shifting with them, the battery reading is accurate or whatever. But then like going over to Shimano Dura Ace, it's completely wired, which is I would say that's pretty standard, but and it doesn't seem to be much of a problem until you accidentally unplug one of your wires from inside the bike. So for the most part, I don't think there would be many problems at all with this, but on my Red Canyon Speed Max, there's a wire that comes out of the bike and it feeds into the rear derailleur. Now there's not a whole lot of slack. Like the wire there there's like just enough slack in it where it plugs into the button or into the little slot in the rear derailleur, and then the wire feeds into the bike, and the battery of the Shimano Dura Ace is housed like inside the frame of the bike. The issue with that is the way the Canyon was designed is, and the way they fit this battery in there, instead of putting the battery in the stem, which is pretty common on most bikes, they put it like right under the bottom bracket, like kind of, it's actually just in front of the bottom bracket on the down tube. So when I accidentally unplugged out of the rear derailleur when I first got the bike, and I was trying to get more slack, I tugged on the wire and it unplugged the wire from the battery inside the frame. Now, the only way to get to that battery without like it's really difficult to get to it. You have to take apart the bottom. You have to take out your through axle, your crank arms, and then you got to take out the bottom bracket, which normally if you take out a bottom bracket on a bike, you should put a brand new bottom bracket in. You should not reuse the bottom bracket. At least on a press fit bottom bracket, they recommend that you don't reuse it. So I was like, this is a nightmare. Now I have to get a whole new bottom bracket because I unplugged a little tiny wire. But like through like with a bike mechanic that helped me do all that, because I don't have the tools to do bottom bracket, and I just don't want to mess that up because it's a pretty important part of the bike, and if you screw it up you could crack your frame. So I had him do that, but we got some more slack added to that wire. Just the way it was routed around just didn't make sense, so we kind of adjusted that. Now it's all good, but I think that's like the only downside with the Dura Ace. Other than that, like you can actually go in the Dura Ace app, and I find the troubleshooting is probably about the same as SRAM. At first, I was kind of like, oh, I like SRAM more just because I was more familiar with it. But after using the Dura Ace or the Shimano app, I think it's actually called eTube. It's just as easy, probably easier than the SRAM app, and tends to work for me more times than the SRAM app does.
Yeah, I know really quickly when I was visiting you up in Auburn, and because I have SRAM on my road bike and Shimano on my TT bike. We're trying to get that thing to connect, and it took like 30 45 minutes just to get connected to the app. And my dad, he has SRAM on his kind of gravel bike, and it's the same thing. You think it's connected, and then the front derailleur is connected, but the rear derailleur isn't, and then you got to connect the shifters, and it's the I'm surprised at how crappy the app is, to be honest. It's a pain to get it to work.
Yeah, yeah, I've had numerous problems where, yes, just exactly like you're saying, like the rear derailleur is connected, but then the front derailleur is not. And I think because everything is wired together on the Shimano, it doesn't have as many issues. Like once you're connected, like you are connected, like there's no question about it. And I've noticed like if I'm troubleshooting with the SRAM and it's taking me a little while to fix it, like the rear derailleur may stay connected, but then the front derailleur disconnects, and it's like, oh, now I gotta restart everything. Um, but the nice thing about the SRAM is that they've got two little battery packs that are removable, and you put one
That
on
is
the
nice.
rear derailleur, one on the front derailleur, and you can buy extras of those, and you could just like keep them on a charger and just like swap them in and out. Whereas with the Shimano, you have to plug it in, and it's not that bad for me. For Seid, it's a little different, but I just have to plug it into the rear derailleur, and it's like just a flip of a little cap, and there's a little button or like a plug there.
Yep.
But yeah, and you can change shifting speed to go from like slow, fast, like very fast. And I have the speed turned all the way up. I just enjoy that. And it makes a difference. And then I actually just recently switched to a 1x setup, moved away from the 2x setup, took off the front derailleur, and it was very easy to move over to the 1x system and get everything set up through the app to make sure that the shifting was working properly. And basically, like I was like wondering if I would have to pick a setting in the app to say like I'm not using 2x anymore and that I am using 1x, because I think in the SRAM app you have to actually pick a setting to say you're using like 1 chainring or 2 chainrings. I should look into that. But as soon as you unplug the front derailleur, like the bike knows that it's not going to shift between a big and small chainring. So that was kind of nice. I didn't have to do anything to say that. It knows that, so it's not trying to jump the gears.
There you guys go. Thank you, Mike, for that bike introduction. I know I took some notes on the levels of. I always know. I always forget which one, the ready tab versus race, what the highest level is. So it's always nice to have a little refresher. And yeah, personally, I like Shimano a bit more just because it is wired. I actually like the wired functionality. I just think that there's less. As long as you remember to charge, because either way, you're gonna have to charge something, whether you're charging the batteries or you're charging your actual bike. Something's got to be charged. Having the portable chargers is nice, but I just find that there's less room for error, I think, with the wired connection.
One difference too with Shimano and SRAM that comes into play if you're switching between different group sets or you're thinking about one or the other. On like a standard SRAM cassette, they start with 10 tooth cog as like the hardest gear. Whereas Shimano only goes down to 11 tooth, which shouldn't be that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things, because like how much of our time are we actually going to be spending in our hardest gear? Probably not even on a flat section unless you like don't have the right gear setup. Like you might need a bigger chainring if you're spending too much time in your hardest gear. Or if you're on a slight descent, you'd be in the hardest gear. But when I switched over from my SRAM setup over to Shimano, the gear ratios were different, and I noticed like I needed some harder gears, so that's why I went to the 1x setup and I opted for a bigger chainring. So now I'm riding a 56 chainring with it's 11 to 30 cassette, and I may switch it to an 11 to 33 on a hilly course, just so I have the added like easy gear to get up some hills. But on my SRAM, it was a 50-37 big and small chainring. And I rode a 10 to 28 tooth cassette.
And
And
those
that,
numbers, those are just how many teeth there are on the cogs from the smallest to the biggest in the back, correct? So like 28 would mean you have 10 teeth on the smallest and 28 teeth on the largest.
yep, and that's for the rear cassette. Yep, so I'll go through both setups. So if anyone is curious and wants to do the math on the gear ratios, but my SRAM setup was 50-37 big chainring and small chainring. And then the rear cassette was 10 to 28. And then my Shimano setup that came with the bike was 52-36 big and small chainring with an 11x30 cassette. But I've now switched to just 1 chainring and it's 56. And like if you wanted to figure out what the gear ratio, like the highest gear ratio is for this now, 56 divided by the 11, 5.09. And that's what that means is how many revolutions. Actually, I have it pulled up somewhere. I'll tell you what it means. it's like, I believe it's like how many revolutions the wheel goes around by like one full turn of the cranks. Yeah, it's X revolutions of the rear wheel for one turn of the cranks. So in your hardest gear now, it's like when I turn the cranks one time, the rear wheel turns 5.09 times. Whereas on my old setup, it was 5 times. So 5 versus 5.09, which is not very much, but it's like just enough to add a little bit harder gears across the board. Like the first, I'm looking at it right now because I've got them mapped out. The first 9 gears are all slightly harder, and then the because of like the spacing of the gears and whatnot, and the differences between SRAM and Shimano, the I think it's 2 of the last 3 are easier, and then the last one is a little bit harder. So yeah, if anyone has questions on bike tech or SRAM and Shimano, reach out.
And then in
But
terms of pricing, I've noticed Dura-Ace tends to be the most expensive usually, right? I think it's usually 500 to 1,000 more depending on the bike's build, at least in what I've noticed so far. Do you have any comments on that?
oh, that's a great point. I actually don't know what the group set costs, just the group set alone. Uh, I would guess that the new SRAM ETAP is probably comparable in price, but
Mhm.
it wouldn't surprise me though if SRAM ended up pricing it a little lower than Shimano just to maybe be more competitive. But I will say it is always cheaper to buy, or it is always, yeah, it's always cheaper to buy a full bike built out than buying a frame of a bike and then like fitting your stuff on after the fact. It's much more expensive to do that, and it's just kind of a hassle. Unless you're like really good at building bikes and you do that for a living, I wouldn't recommend it.
There you guys go. The full down low of Shimano versus SRAM. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. I think that's gonna pretty much wrap it up. I don't know. Do you guys have anything else?
One more.
Hey, go
Said
at it.
Dave's getting frustrated with me. I'm just like blowing up his phone lately about this, but so I've been reading a good book, and I read a good chunk of this book while I was on the flight back home, and it's called The Future of Nutrition. It's written by a Cornell professor named T. Colin Campbell. He's been at Cornell for like 45 years. Uh, he was a co-author of a book called The China Study, which then some of the principles and beliefs from that and the research was turned into a documentary that a lot of people have probably seen it. It's called Forks Over Knives. He was instrumental in making that documentary with another guy named Phil Esselstyn. And he's a big proponent of the whole food plant-based diet.
Oh, this is your challenge that you're talking about.
So this segues into the challenge. So um I actually have tried that before, like doing like being plant-based. It's different from vegan. Like vegan, I think there's some things that people like justify like in a vegan diet that is much different than like a whole food plant-based diet. Like you can get vegan cheese. Well, vegan cheese is a processed food. That's not a whole food. That doesn't really count in like a whole food plant-based diet. So I told Seid, I said after Ironman Maryland, maybe like a week or two after the race, if I can give myself enough time to like research it, plan it out, I'd like to do a challenge where from let's call it like October 1st, I think that's like around the 2 week mark after the race or 1 week mark after the race. I'll go plant-based 100% from October 1st until the end of the year. So that gives me 3 full months of
So
being
you don't want to wait till after Kona?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
I'll do it. I'll see how it goes out at Kona. I think I'll be fine. Like it won't be. Well, maybe. I can take as many carbs as I want on this diet. I'm definitely not restricting carbs. but I'm gonna do plant-based for 3 months, and I told Said I will do blood tests before and after and see like how things changed. I also did a blood test earlier this year, so we have like kind of like a baseline in January from like before I got heavy into the Ironman training. Then I'll have one like after Maryland where I have finished my Ironman blocks. I've done 2 Ironmans. Like that'll be good to see like where my blood test results are at, and then do another one after this 3 month challenge. I think 3 months is that's a fair bit of time. I think I'll
Yeah.
definitely see some changes. Um, and then I'll also do a DEXA scan before and after and see if like there's any body composition changes. And obviously we'll test VO2 and
Massively
like,
decreased.
yeah, Said is predicting a 40% decrease in FTP. So we'll see.
I mean,
And
as
then
long as you can still eat eggs, then you should be fine.
I can't.
Although you can't eat chicken, then you're screwed.
Tomas should have been on this diet. What is he doing? Um, yeah, so we'll do a test and we'll see like maybe we'll time it so like Said and I can do some benchmark testing and then see like percentage improvements off of our own times and paces and power numbers and whatnot from then until like the end of December and see, or like first week of January we'll do like a test week or something like that. I
Also
don't
like
know.
measure like quality of life, like how you feel, like daily, like energy and all that, I think as well.
Yeah, we'll do weekly check-ins like on the podcast. At the very end, it's like, the new supplement that you've tried. We'll do another segment. It's like quality of life check on Mike.
Mike.
Is Mike alive this week? Has he
Yeah,
eaten enough? Is he malnourished or is he not?
that's
Stay
funny.
tuned each week.
Yeah.
Yeah, that should be good. But we should try to make sure that macros and what, because you track relatively what you eat. You have a rough idea of like
Yeah.
yeah. So, but we should try to keep it because the biggest thing will be protein. I think as long we have to make sure we keep that up. But as long as you're still getting around 150 to 160 grams of protein a day, I think we should be fine.
I just have a question for like, is peanut butter included in this or it's not because it's processed, right?
Yeah, that's actually a great point. I should
I
look
feel
that up.
like peanut butter is one of the ones where you get a lot of the fats and a lot of the protein. But I think it is like considered a processed food.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I'll have to look that up, and that's another thing. I'm not fully well versed on like what is and is not considered like whole food
Yeah.
plant. I mean, obviously, like any raw plants, yes. But certain processed foods I have to see like, is that a processed food that they would say, yes, this is okay, or no, it's not okay. And I'm sure I would have to probably look for more of like a natural peanut butter if I were to
Mhm.
look for
Yep.
one, rather than like say something like Jif or Peter Pan or any of that stuff. Most of the time now I get like an organic peanut butter. Um, but I know there are some like more all natural stuff. It's definitely gonna be a challenge to like figure out what I can and can't eat. But there's good apps out there now where that people have made where like you can scan foods and see like what would qualify and what wouldn't. But there might be some things that I'm like willing to make an exception on, like peanut butter, for example. Like it's processed, but it is like, and that's where like vegan versus whole food plant-based is probably a little different. Like vegan would be like, yeah, peanut butter's fine, but like maybe under the whole food plant-based, they might be like, no, that's not okay. And yeah, that's a big thing in this would be is cutting out processed foods as much as I possibly can. And part of like my whole reason for this is not just like to test it for triathlon, which I am very curious to see like how endurance performance feels on it. But more so just like general health and longevity and like family history of cancers and heart disease. And like the whole science behind this is that it's supposed to help reduce like chances of cancer, and like nutrition plays a huge role in cancer. But up until even I think it was like 1982 was one of the earliest papers that was published by this professor. He published it with a couple other scientists about the link between nutrition and cancer. Before that, it was kind of it was kind of swept under the rug. Like people didn't really believe there was a link between nutrition and cancer. I think now it's more widely accepted, but there's still people pushing to say like, it doesn't have as much of an impact as you think. But I would disagree, and I think there's influence from large companies in the big agricultural space that will say otherwise. But there's a lot of research and data to show that it does. So
Stay tuned. That's definitely going to be interesting.
I don't think I can drink Coke anymore either. Not that I drink Coke, but that's like the one thing after a long day of workouts, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, get Coke to revive me. So
Oh well. Yeah. Well, there you guys go. Hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode of the Try Hard. If you guys have any questions or any ideas for Mike and his upcoming challenge, definitely let us know. Shoot us a message. And as always, we'd love a 5-star rating and review on Apple or Spotify, wherever you listen. So, yeah, thanks for watching, listening, and we'll catch you guys in the next one. Mike, one more thing.
yeah. And if anyone out there listening is currently plant-based and feels like sending any recommendations or like guidelines, help, tips, anything, please send it our way. Find us on Instagram, I guess. It's probably the best way to find us.
And we also have a very special guest, I think, coming on next week. So that should be a fun episode as well. All right. See you guys in the next one.
See you guys.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Try Hard podcast. If you enjoyed it, we'd appreciate it if you could share with others and leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you have any questions or comments for us, you can either DM us on Instagram, leave a comment on YouTube, or message us through the Spotify app. Lastly, I'd like to thank the sponsor of this week's episode, the Naperville Acupuncture Center. If you ever find yourself in the Chicagoland area and are dealing with some aches and pains, I cannot recommend Frank and Angela enough. They do an amazing job over there, and I promise you will leave feeling so much better. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you guys back here next week.